Did the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics mock Christianity, or did Christians simply overreact to the wrong thing? Will the new Rings of Power season live up to the hype? And will the success of Deadpool and Wolverine lead to more R-rated superhero movies? All this and more on this week's episode of Faith and Pop Culture.
Well, what's up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 21 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I am joined at the desk, as I always am, by the Olympics on TV to my procrastination of literally everything else in my life, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Oh, the Olympics, that's what's up. And if you're like me, which it sounds like you are, it's like pretty much 24/7. Like, I don't know what's on. Badminton it is.
Oh,
which is like, if you've watched badminton, like, like they go hard and it's pretty amazing.
Like I'm at the point already. I know like the Olympics has only been going on for a couple of days, but like if you want to go do a deep dive about the strategy of like water polo, fencing, and field hockey, like I can have those conversations.
We were watching some jiu-jitsu this morning. Like, girls were loving it. Like, we always just pick a team to root for. It's like, no one from our country is in this match, but I like the blue guy. Like let's go for that one. It's like sweet.
Yeah. What is, if you had to pick your favorite?
Oh man, I really like a lot of the track and field stuff, which hasn't really started yet. But it's hard. Like, we've really enjoyed the skateboarding so far, and obviously swimming, I think is always up there. And I'm in a house full of girls, and so we're hardcore gymnastics.
Yeah, I feel like gymnastics is always like the big,
which
problem.
I think to me is like, gymnastics is sort of like, I feel like the peak of like physical, like, I don't know, strength and accuracy. Like, I feel like it's like the most difficult physical thing to do, like, and still like look good doing it, I think.
And even just the diversity of the what they have to do.
Yeah.
I mean, like, there is like different strokes and stuff.
Yeah, there's some things it's just like power and speed.
But like, like the floor in gymnastics, and then like, the uneven bars, or some of those things are like,
yeah.
It's like those are completely different skills, and these people are nailing it.
Yeah.
So I've been binging plenty of.
What do you have a favorite? Would you say it's gymnastics or swimming?
I get into gymnastics. Swimming, I get hooked on every time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's something about a race, I think, that is really like just draws you in. Like, whether it's swimming, there's like kayak cross, which is a first in the Olympics this year, which is like you do the kayak thing, but like with everybody else. And so there's this sort of race element. But yeah, anything.
And like swimming, like they're all like side by side. I know running this too, like the tracks and stuff.
But they stay separate, and it's just this nice delineation.
Yeah, you can like very clearly see like this person is ahead. And there's always this drama, and I'm all about the drama.
Well, there's like the first Italian to win gold in, like, I think it was the 100 free or 200. I forget which one it was now, but like there's been a lot of upsets in the Romania guy who won gold, I think, like first Romanian medal in maybe ever for swimming.
I think that's it really is like about the human drama. Like, sports, a lot of these sports I don't care about, and I probably won't care about until 4 years from now.
Well, and then it's
back. But it's just those human stories that I.
Yeah, and like we were watching the men's gymnastics, and the one guy, I forget his name now, but like they did a little human story, like, and it's like his dad sharing, and then like halfway through, it's like, and when we lost his mom to cancer, like 3 years ago, it's like you come on, people, like I wasn't prepared for this, and it's just like, okay, well, like. Sheesh, like they really lay it on thick, but like it's just cool to see, what these athletes have gone through to get to where they are, and then it's just like the immense amount of pressure. And there's like the one American gymnast who, like, his only routine is the pommel horse, and like so he's just been like waiting. Like, I think you've probably seen pictures of him just like napping like on the sidelines, just like he has to wait till the end to do his one event. And I don't know, I think it's awesome. Like, I'm here for all of it, so
I know it's the best. I get hooked every time. But we can probably jump just right into, because
speaking of Olympics,
speaking of the Olympics and things that are good, there's also been some stuff that people aren't as happy about as gold medals for your country and human inspirational stories, and that is the opening ceremony. So this has been probably the biggest cultural story, at least from a Christian perspective. I think probably just culturally in general, from any perspective, is
Yeah.
just sort of the opening ceremonies. They always spark discussion and stuff. They're supposed to. There's always
Yeah.
the different things they can do. The spectacle, like whenever like they did London and the Queens, like bungee,
She
or, like,
skydived,
skydiving,
yeah.
like from there's always stuff that stands
Yeah.
out. Well, the highlight, or at least the one that sparked the most conversation and controversy for the Paris Olympics, has to do with a drag queen apparent mockery of Da Vinci's The Last Supper. And I think there were several different moments that all sort of tied into kind of a similar scenes and characters for that. But through the opening ceremonies, there is a moment where it seems like there's a bunch of like drag queens and they're sort of sitting around like a table, which is very like reminiscent of the Lord's Supper painting by or Last Supper by Da Vinci. And then there's like other there's like a song performance where they're sort of like almost walking on a catwalk. And at one point there's like a guy that's painted blue and he's basically naked and he's singing or gyrating on the table or whatever he's doing. And as expected, like instant backlash, instant like
Yeah.
like, I don't even know if they were probably still on screen.
Oh, I'm sure.
Like the social media feeds were just flooded with Christians just outraged about this and calling it disgusting and even calling for boycotts of the Olympics and what else, and just a lot of hot takes, a lot of heated opinions towards this. And as things have gone on, so I thought we get into sort of that moment of the opening ceremony and the response to it, and what as Christians, what should we, how should we process something like this? But it seems like we've got more context. In the last couple of days for this, I don't know if you want to get into this. Is it in fact Da Vinci's painting being explored?
Right. Yeah. So like that was at least the narrative, like right out of the gate. And like, if you look at any sort of even marginally conservative pundit or media outlet, it was like, they're mocking Christianity and the Last Supper by Da Vinci. But upon further analysis and as sort of the dust settles, we realized that no, in fact, it was the Feast of the Gods by a Dutch artist who I won't try and pronounce, but let's say his first name is Jan, and Jan van Bilge or Bilgert. I don't know how. Apologies to his family. He did this painting. It was sort of the Feast of the Gods, and it was supposed to be on Mount Olympus for the banquet of the marriage of Thetis and Peleus. I'm not super down with my Greek mythology, but anyway, so it was painted several hundred years after Da Vinci's Last Supper, and if you look at that painting, I think that you can see some inspiration from Da Vinci's Last Supper in the painting that the ceremony was. So there's like all these layers of reference, but like the ceremony was sort of taking it from that painting. And you can see the similarities in both the original painting and obviously the opening ceremony's depiction of that to the Last Supper. But it was, in fact, at least like I think they probably knew that there would maybe be some upset people about how this does resemble the Last Supper. But I think the fact is that the intention was not, hey, let's poke fun at Christians and let's do the Last Supper, because it wasn't that.
And I mean, it makes more sense in context. Like this is the Olympics.
Yes.
And this is a feast of the the Olympians, like the
Yes.
gods, like
of Greece, and it's like this is how it all started, like sort of the lore and the mythology of the Olympic Games.
Yeah, and like what that represents. I get,
because it would seem very like left field if it's like, let's also throw in a random painting who wasn't done by a French artist, but like let's put it in here and make fun of Christians for a quick second and then we'll move on with our show. It's like, I don't think that's what they were trying to do.
I mean, that's not going to stop people from.
No, people
saying
will.
that's what they're-
Well, yeah, people will say that
but
and believe that.
And again, like you said, the painting, the Feast of the Gods, like that painting is housed in France. So it's like it wasn't done by a French artist, but like it's in, so there is more connections to
Yeah.
that takes away some of the, I guess, this the random, like, oh, I guess they're just going to mock my faith now. I guess France hates
Yeah.
Christians, and some of that. So I guess it's sort of a hard question to get into, because I feel like there's a lot to get into with this. And I think the big thing for me is just like, is it a big deal, or is it like just a big overreaction to something? And I think there's two aspects to it as well. I think there's the side of just it's a bunch of drag queens and like half naked people and transgender people, like actors and stuff, and there's this like and this parading like very sexualized through all of that. Like, is that needed in an opening ceremony? Like, is that something that Christians should speak out again? Like, there's sort of that side of it of just sort of
Yeah.
this the sexualized nature of it. And I think the second part of it is the part that seems to be getting more airtime than the first, of just like this is a direct mockery of Christianity. This is mocking this painting.
Yeah.
How dare they do that one thing? And I feel like you can sort of approach those differently. Like, you
Yeah.
can have different reactions to that. But what would you say for because like I feel like and we probably played sort of our hand a little bit, but I think there are things for Christians to be like, okay, that's not right, or like that. There's kind of parading sin on display, and that's a testament to the times we live, and where things are going. But there is some of that, but I feel like there's a whole lot of like totally over the top, knee jerk, like
Yeah.
rapid fire hot takes for something that just seems like isn't even necessarily like factually accurate.
Yeah. That pretty much that pretty much sums it up. I mean, again, like this, we're gonna sound like a broken record, but once again, like Christians getting outraged, I think, over the wrong thing, and so I mean, everywhere you look, it's just like, oh, how dare they mock Christianity, and there's just very like, I would say almost holy war type rhetoric around this thing, like, you know, heads are gonna roll because you mocked this most sacred painting of ours. This is representative of the Last Supper, and it's like, wait a second, like, first of all, it wasn't a mockery of that painting, despite however you feel, and whatever your first hot take was. Since you don't want to go back on that, that doesn't change the facts. And I think the other thing is, when you make such a big deal out of something that you were factually inaccurate about, and make it this huge thing, well, then you don't really have the credibility to push back in the ways that I think Christians should push back. And that goes back to the sort of the unnecessarily sexualization of the opening ceremony. And I think that is a place where we could say, hey, like, that's unnecessary. We don't need that, especially if this is going out to families and kids. That's certainly something that I think is a legitimate criticism of the opening ceremonies. But now, because you've made this whole Last Supper thing, this just blown it way out of proportion for a thing that wasn't even the intention. Well, you kind of lost your credibility to push back in other ways that I think are more legitimate to the opening ceremonies and all of that. And so I think it is an enormous overreaction, and it's really puzzling to me, because a lot of people who hold this view, I would say, are typically very smart people, but like from the get-go, people have just seemed very dug in on this point, and it's just kind of odd to me to watch it unfold.
I think part of it is just like it's birthed out of this sort of this cultural moment we're in, where I just feel like victimhood is like a serious drug. Like
Oh yeah.
there's some aspect of, again, like, there is persecution, like like real persecution where Christians are dying in the world.
Yeah.
People are since Jesus himself was crucified. There's been that kind of persecution, but there is this sense that I just feel like as Christians we can be so soft. Like we can, like if you think like the early church, like they're like, literally like having their friends ripped from their homes and like fed to lions and stuff, and
Yeah.
it's like living the faith. Where like today it's like, when like the majority of the world is at least nominally somewhat religious or
Yeah.
Christian, like, but then someone, seems to mock a painting or something, and like we just fall apart, and it's
Yeah.
like,
Well, they're acting like soccer players. You know, it's like, oh, you brush past me and now I have a broken arm, and it's like, come on, like, and again, this goes back to this idea that like Christians are outraged that how dare the world, how dare lost humanity act like lost humanity? Don't you guys know any better? It's like, no, they don't, and like that's the whole point. And do you think being outraged about this is like, how is that helping your cause, and how is that helping, spread the gospel? I think maybe in fact it's doing the opposite. And so it's just sort of like, I don't know. I get frustrated about reactions like this to these sort of things.
Well, I think the part that gets me too is like, again, like, it's not wrong to have even strong feelings against something. Or like, hey, that's sinful. I wish, that bothers me. I wish that wasn't there. Like, it, we're not saying that like that isn't okay. Like,
Right.
that Christians should just, well, that's the way the world is. Like, just step back and like, no, like Christians should be engaged. The part that bothers me is just that, like, I feel like so much of it is disingenuous. Like, it's this sort of machine of outrage and persecution and like kind of culture war where like, are people really, was their faith shaken? Are we really worried that, 7 seconds in an opening ceremony of showing this, a recreation of a painting that was inspired by a Christian painting done by an artist that probably wasn't even Christian. Like,
Yeah.
like, are we really that concerned that, we're just disgusted and we just can't, we need to raise a big outrage and, that's just going to consume us for days. Like, I don't think we are. Like, I think what we
Yeah.
are, what we are fueled by is just some of that culture war, like some of that.
Yeah.
Okay, here's another example of this sort of this perverted world, secular world, and like we need to to march against this. And like, the verse that constantly gets, at least in my own feeds, quote is, people will say, God will not be mocked. Which is sort of taken from Galatians 6, where it says, do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows, whatever sows to please their flesh. From their flesh will reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. And a lot of people like constantly pull, not even just for this, but like for these sort of, like, God will not be mocked. And
Yeah.
but I feel like they're taking that verse in a way that wasn't being used in Galatians.
Which
Like,
is why I'm on here yelling at you about why I'm so mad.
I feel like sort of that God will not be mocked gets taken by a lot of like as like a rallying cry of like, we need to go and like put down the riots and put down the rebellion against God, and like we need to quelch that because God's not going to be mocked and we're not going to let you mock him. Where like the verse is saying like, no, like God is the judge. Like,
Yeah.
people can mock him. Like, people, the verse implies people will be mocking God, but like, and one day we all die. We all end up before
Right.
the throne of heaven, and like God's not going to be mocked in the throne of heaven. Like,
Right.
that's the verse of like, hey, God can handle himself. Like, I feel like as Christians, we almost treat him like he's sort of this like pipsqueak, guy, and we got to go defend him from all these cultural bullies and
Yeah.
punch him down because God is too small to like fight his own battles. And I feel like this verse is saying the exact opposite of that.
Yeah, and I think you see that, like, again, and we've talked about this on here before, but the sort of marriage between sort of right-wing conservatism and Christianity, this is, I think, a great example of where those lines kind of get blurred, because it is very much language that is more about like political right-wing or conservatism and not so much Christianity. Because a lot of these folks, I don't think, are really concerned with Christianity, because I think they're taking sort of the opposite approach to defending the faith, if you will, and it's really more aligned with this sort of conservatism, sort of right wing, anti woke, whatever movement that's happening. And so I think it's another example of sort of that blending that I think just doesn't really do anybody favors, again, except for those who make their livelihood off of farming outrage, thanks to the internet and social media. And so all of those things, I think, come together to sort of make this sort of toxic soup of what we have that lacks all nuance. And again, we're not surprised about that, but it's just another example of why that, maybe wait a day or two, like think it over before you like post your hot take. But again, if your goal is for clicks and for engagement, then you got to be the first one to sort of say these things. And then if they stick, then, your channel blows up, or, you're making a lot more money from ad revenue because you're doing this online. And so it's all these things that kind of, I think, come together to, I think, make a less than ideal response from like Christendom to sort of what's perceived as a mockery of our religion.
Yeah, because I feel like this has just become such a case study for that. It was just like, if you're just looking for ammo to fight this sort of cultural war, but I kind of think of, and there's almost a sense that, like sexual perversion in culture is like, that was invented 5 years ago, and like some new thing we got to deal with. And like just go just like Google the stuff that was going on, in like the like the early church. Like, it's it's not like we just discovered, it might have looked different, but like, there's a lot of sexually perverted stuff happening right around, like literally, like in temples by where the above Corinth or some of these churches, and you can kind of glean some of that from like Paul's letters. And I kind of think, what would the church then's response be? Like, because they were surrounded by that too. Like, like obviously they would say that's wrong, that's sinful. Like they wouldn't compromise on that. But like, would they just sort of gather and just get mad at like?
Would they go like,
how dare that pagan temple down the street is like having religious prostitutes and stuff, like how
were they petitioning Domitian and saying, hey pal, we're not going to take it anymore? And so it's like, no, I don't think they would have.
I just don't feel like the early church spent a whole lot of time. I don't think they had the luxury to spend a lot of time just gathering together and like getting mad at stuff. Like I feel like
and again, they were like getting mad at the pagan world for being the pagan world. It's like that to me is a relatively new thing within Christianity, is the outrage at pagans acting like pagans. It's like, you're surprised? Like, what did you think? Like, you thought they, had a moral compass? Like you thought they were going to behave like good Christians? Like, so to me, that is maybe something that is somewhat new in this whole this dialogue, I guess, would be how upset Christians get when the world acts like the world.
Yeah, like France is one of the most like least religious group that country in Europe. Like,
despite their history of they have a long history of religion, but it's very not religious.
Yeah, as far as like attendance in action, that kind of like belonging into like religious bodies or whatever is extremely low. So should it surprise us that their sort of ideologies of this city, the city of love or whatever it is, like that represents things that isn't consistent with how we would orthodox kind of biblical theology. But again, I think there's a lot to that. We don't need to spend more time on it, but I think the big takeaway for me is just there's no harm done, and I would even say there's plenty of value in just taking a deep breath, not typing something, and just thinking about it. Like just maybe you think about it and you're still like, what, I am still mad. I'm still like, I want to go speak my give my 2 cents, but just sort of that. We don't need to always be mad about stuff. Like I feel like we're wasting a lot of time doing more valuable stuff by just kind of getting the choir together and just all having that sort of therapy session of how we're all mad at the same thing. Like we don't need to do that. I think there's more important things that we are called to. But one of the things that I feel like can also be a sort of a therapy session, and something that I feel personally called to, is the Lord of the Rings. So give us a little reprieve from the controversy, and just to geek out for a second, because they released a new trailer, the Comic-Con trailer for the Rings of Power Season 2.
Yes, they did.
I'm excited for this. I know because I think there's some overlap from the first conversation. There was a lot of discussion, controversy, division, divisiveness and stuff regarding this first season of this show. I think some of it's just people didn't like the show, and that's okay. You don't need to like, there's lots of shows to watch. I think some of it was also just, it needed to fit into one of this sort of culture war box on either side.
Yeah.
And, even before the show came out, you have like suddenly there's a lot of like Tolkien scholars that know like why it's so inconsistent with Tolkien, and it's like, wait on, buddy. Let's talk about this. Like,
Yeah.
someone hasn't even read any of Tolkien's stuff, but they can tell you that this show is just, you know, going to the bathroom on his legacy or something, and it's some of that. But to leave that aside, this trailer looks great. Like, the show comes out when this episode airs. It'll be this month, at the end of the month. So like, a couple more weeks, and it looks great. Like, what are your?
Yeah, I'm excited. It looks pretty awesome. I like the first season. I think maybe my if I can remember that far back, but I think maybe it was slower. Was maybe the only sort of criticism of it, but I thought it was a really good show. I'm excited to see sort of, this is maybe the Empire Strikes Back segment of the show.
Because they're leaning into like, this is about the villains.
Yeah, this is sort of Sauron's rise,
it's
and
going to be darker, and like
yeah,
we've talked about that before. Like,
yeah,
it doesn't need to be darker to be better, but
Tom Bombadil.
But we got Entwives.
Yeah.
Who will at some point get lost. I can't find them.
That's true.
It won't spoil how they get lost, but I do think it looks epic. Like, it looks like, if your concern was that it was just too slow, this one looks like there's more action.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's like some of the character development and stuff. With the Galadriel, maybe could have been done different, and like there are things to critique about the show.
Sure.
Like, I'm not a total fanboy for it. Like.
But I think what's interesting about it is that you have some space and time to sort of really marinate in these characters and this world, and I think that's really, at the end of the day, what all you can ask for from something that's trying to take on the scope of what it's trying to take on with the Lord of the Rings. And so I think it's going to be cool, and I think it'll be exciting to sort of see what they do with it.
Yeah, and I feel like the show, at least a little bit, did capture some of the like theological underpinnings of Tolkien. Like, I feel like the Lord of the Rings to me has always been, or just Tolkien's like mythology, like it's this sort of darkness, and like light and hope sort of pierces that. Like, that's sort of the whole, even his other like non-Lord of the Rings stuff are like even way more dark and tragic, and like, like things are always grim, but there's always sort of that like, like, he doesn't leave it there like George Martin with like the Game of Thrones, like, where it's like, and that's the end of the story. It is all grim and meaningless. Like, he always has sort of that hope. And
there's that thread, that
towards like kind of that salvation that comes from beyond, and the gods and some of that in his story. And I feel like the first season captured some of that, and so I hope they do, because that is my big thing. Is just like, I don't care if they change the like. Some of like the timeline, and like, they're not going to tell 10,000 years of history in this 8 episodes. Like, I don't care about that. Like, it would be awesome. I would probably watch that. I just don't want them to like, to do something that seems very out of line with sort of the more Christian underpinnings of the story.
Yeah.
So again, I'm excited for that. We'll definitely, when that show starts coming out,
there'll be more to say. I'm sure
there will be more to say. But one other thing, speaking of shows and things that are that give people a lot to say, the old
That's
Merc
true.
with the mouth, as he is called, Deadpool. So kind of the big movie that just released last weekend, Deadpool and Wolverine. It's sparked some conversation. It made some money. This thing,
quite a lot of money, in fact.
Yeah, this is another one of those. The movie industry's dead.
Except
except for these ones, for the ones that people care about. It's just dead for these bad movies that no one, Fast and Furious 38. But hey, people are still going to this, and in fact, in record-setting amount. So this movie broke multiple records. Probably the most notable one is that it is the highest opening weekend, both domestically and worldwide, in the history of cinema for an R-rated movie. So domestically, it made $211 million opening weekend. Worldwide, 444.1. I wish there wasn't that one. I love nice round numbers.
Yeah.
But so it made a lot of money. A lot of again, and that hasn't necessarily been the case lately with Marvel. Like things, like even in the movie, they make a lot of meta jokes about like, this movie's coming at a bad time in the MCU. Like, things have been tapering off. So this movie maybe we'll jumpstart that. And kind of the question for that again, you haven't seen the movie.
I have not.
I don't
Shocker, I
necessarily
didn't go to the theater.
This is one of the ones that I would say, hey, you know what?
Take a pass.
Take a pass.
Yeah.
You know,
I got that feeling. Yeah.
I wasn't crazy about this movie, but I think it does raise some questions just about, I mean, the movie and some of the discussions that happened around it, but also just what does it mean, like, you know, for just movies and comic book movies? Like, does the massive success of this movie, like, kind of open the floodgates, like, get in the mindset of like a Hollywood exec? You know, does the fact that a lot of people want to saw an R-rated Marvel Disney movie, like, start having you pencil in like what other movies you can make R-rated?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like that is a sort of a tricky executive decision. I think it definitely means that the Deadpool franchise will carry on, and like those are, you know, they're seeing money bags in the future of whatever direction Deadpool goes. I don't know. Like I don't know that it necessarily means that is it because it's R rated or is it because it's Deadpool? Is it because it's Ryan Reynolds? Like, I'm not sure that this is necessarily like, all right, sweet, we're gonna lean hard into the R rating now. Um, Although I think that is certainly possible.
Because if there's one thing I don't have confidence in, it's Hollywood execs thinking in a nuanced like way about,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
not the reactionary of like, oh, people like this, make 4 more of those. Like,
Yeah.
you know, let's make 10 sequels and spin-offs.
What else can we make R rated quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's probably true. But yeah, I think they are again like I think there is a bit of for all the comic book stuff, like there's always been that sort of struggle because there's this overwhelming desire to make comic book movies into the foreseeable future, and yet there's been a underwhelming quality of comic book movies, I think lately, and so I think it's probably just a numbers game. Like we can lose a few as long as we have the occasional, you know, Deadpool hit that goes off like this. So yeah, I don't really know that it'll necessarily be a huge boon for R-rated comic book movies, but there has obviously been an uptick in that already.
Yeah, I hope there's, and like the thing that I think people, again, I don't at all claim to be like a comic book geek, like well versed at all in comic books. I didn't grow up reading comic books, but like from the ones I have, and like, you know, just the awareness of some of that, like R-rated material in a comic book is not like I think because a lot of the first Marvel movies and stuff were like very sort of take your kids, and
Yeah,
that's not necessarily always the like, there's a lot of harsh content in comic books. Like if
yeah.
they wanted to go there, you know, like in many ways, I think they sort of sanitize some of the,
Oh, I'm sure.
you know,
I'm
like
sure.
either with language or just like overly sexualized visuals and stuff. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of that. Like they very easily could. Again, I don't think they're gonna, you know, now the next Iron Man or whatever is gonna be R-rated. Like,
Right.
you know, who knows? But I do think also this. I've been fascinated by just the conversation from Christians like surrounding this movie. Sort of because again, last week we talked about okay, how do you approach sort of an R-rated movie, and I feel like this is sort of being like the lived out application of
Yeah.
because you get different perspectives. Like you get people that are just like, you know what, okay, from what I hear, like I don't want to, you know, I would like to see Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. I don't necessarily need to hear 100 F-bombs to do that. You know, hey, there's other joys in life. I'm gonna go buy
Yeah.
a Dr. Pepper and enjoy that. Like, you know, like
Yeah.
you don't necessarily have to, you know, kind of the FOMO. You're gonna miss out. Like there's sort of that side. There's other people like even like in our comments for our review for this, like saying like, hey, we did see it. Like, hey, there were parts I liked, but I felt an unease about that. And like, again, that's sort of like where I felt like I feel like if I wasn't gonna review it, like I probably would have just laughed halfway through and be like, you know what, like there's some funny stuff, but like I don't need to hear all this. Like,
Yeah.
you know, if I wasn't like staying to watch the review, and then there's sort of the to sort of go full circle to like even the opening ceremony stuff of just, you know, I don't know, like I feel like Christians shouldn't make light of movie, like, you know, it's just a movie, like no, like there's movies matter and like stories shape us, and like
Yeah.
it's like not to like overly diminish that, but that being said, like it's just a movie, like it's, you know, like
Yeah.
it is just like again, if it was filled with a bunch of like nudity and sex, then like I think my tenor would change a little bit on that, because I think that can lead to other stuff. But like, is it like edifying to sit through and just 2 hours of sort of junk and stuff and then you leave? Like, no, like I don't think there's anything edifying about Deadpool and Wolverine, but I don't necessarily think, because there's been a lot of the same kind of comments about it.
Yeah.
This is mocking Christianity and this is blasphemy and it's satanic, and it's like, well,
That satanic card likes to get pulled out.
yeah, like
a lot.
like the thing is, like if you look at scripture, like what Jesus calls Satan, and he says like to Peter, like, get behind me, Satan. Like anything that's sort of out of line with God's will is considered satanic. So like from that sense, like all the movies are satanic. Like there's satanic. There's a bunch of stuff that we can, that we can kind of play that card and be biblically accurate for that. But yeah, I think we can also just like, like, it's just a filthy, profane movie that's very like going for a juvenile kind of shock jock humor.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like not everything. Like again, like, I think there's a bunch of junk in it, but like not everything is an attack on Christianity. Like,
right.
Because there's a scene in that where like Wolverine is sort of on a cross and like or like on an X, and he's sort of like pinned up, like it looks like he's crucified, and like it's just interesting to see how people navigate that of like, and like, that scene again, as I've been told and just looked into it, like comes from the cover of a famous comic book, Wolverine, and like the X is like clearly like the X-Men logo, and like it's not a Jesus thing, and but there's like tons of comments and stuff about how that's mocking Christianity and like an attack on Christianity, and I just don't get it. Like I don't, like,
well, it's almost like there's just this really like hunger to find offensive things in culture, and like, heap coals on yourself. There's almost this like perverted sense of victimhood or wrongdoing that it's almost in, I guess, online at least. Again, online is not always the real world, but it's like there is just this like hunger to find things that are like offensive to Christianity, or that somehow mock God, or mock Christian ideology or theology or whatever. And it's like there's almost this like full-time job of people to go and find the things that upset us or should upset us as Christians, when it's like, I don't know, like, just go live your life. Like,
yeah,
you don't have to go
if you're
find
not as upset as I am,
right,
and like, I'm going to pray for your salvation, kind
right.
of idea.
Which again goes back to this idea that like it's outrage farming, and it's like that's if that's what it is, if that's the model that's set up, which is like the more outrage you have, like the better your stuff does, the more money you make. And it's like, okay, well, they're playing the outrage game, and this is where it leads, is we go and like find the slightest thing that we can and again, there's lots of things to be upset about.
Well, and that's the thing too, is like, if you want to be upset and like, offended or like bothered by something in Deadpool, like, you don't need to look far. Like you're going to find something in like the opening scene of this movie. Like, we don't need to find like additional, or like, because again, like for me, like, that motif visual of like sort of the crucified, like the Christ figure, the hero that sacrifices himself, like that's in stories all over the place. And like, and like, a lot of them would say that that's inspired by, that's why we call them Christ figures. Like, they're inspired by, so like, even if, hey, he's nailed up sort of this X, and he's sacrificing for his world, and like, it's sort of like a, motif sort of, reflecting Christ's sacrifice. Like, even if that was like a direct line, like, I don't see how that's mocking or offensive to, like, they're not saying like, that Wolverine is Jesus or something. Like, it's just, it's this sort of motif. And again, like, I maybe to wrap all these discussions sort of in a bow, is just, I feel like as Christians, like, there's a lot of sin in the world that we can be upset about, and that we can like speak against, and like try and do our best to sort of, make the world a better place, that we don't need to like add more to it. Like, we don't need to sort of look for it and like get overly emotional. And like, again, if you just personally didn't like that scene, that's a totally different conversation. It's just more the general of like everything that, whether it's the Olympics or this new movie or whatever, like, everything is mocking Christianity and against us. And some of that kind of cultural stuff. So I think kind of the rule of thumb is to say, stay away from that. Go watch some Bob Ross and put a smile on your face, try and get some sun and enjoy the good things in life. But things that you can enjoy, or in this case, probably not necessarily enjoy. The next segment of this podcast we have out now and coming soon. So like we said, we don't need to get into like the big movie that's out now is Deadpool and Wolverine. I've had people like ask, like, hey, should Christians go see this? Like, I would say no. Like, I don't necessarily think you're a bad Christian, or like, I just don't think anyone should go see it. Like, I think if you do go see it, maybe check out the review for some of the content stuff. Like, brace yourself, and I guess try and appreciate some of the fan service and things like the funny jokes, and then like go home and take a shower or something like.
But it seems like the fan service is not worth the additional content.
Yeah, I mean, this movie is like
it's one giant fan
90% just sort of random fan service, and like 10% like half done script of a story. Like, it's very much, again, for me, I found it empty. Like, it's just like, okay, here, hey, this person played this person. Here's a cameo. That's cool. And then you move on. Like, maybe if you're like more into that universe, that would mean more. And like you want to go sit through the junk to get those. I don't know. That's up to you. But again, I think it's probably one for a lot of Christians to sit out. One that I personally wish I could sit out. Not because it's profane, but is the movie coming out this week, Harold and the Purple Crown. Did you ever read this book growing up?
No, I've never heard of this.
You've never heard of?
No.
Oh, it's like the little baby, and he has like his purple crown, and he's. If you saw the cover,
I missed it. Yeah,
I
missed the.
An early classic of for
I'll
children.
take your word for it, Daniel.
But one thing Hollywood knows how to do is take this sort of 10-page book about a baby coloring on things and turn it into some like summer spectacle movie, and
that everyone's gonna hate.
And like the baby comes into like real world, and he's like an adult now, and he's like the crown's magic, and like if you were to rank the movies that I'm excited about,
cannot wait for your review for that, Daniel.
So I think I will. I might take my kids. I feel like there's maybe a bit more in their wheelhouse.
Yeah.
But I'll hopefully there's not a bunch of junk in it. Just good old fashioned bad movie. The other movie that I don't think I'm going to be able to review just because I'm going to be seeing Harold on the Purple Crown is Firing Squad. I don't know if you're familiar with this. Like, I wasn't even familiar with it, but it's sort of another faith-based movie. It has some of the regular guys you see in all these movies, like Kevin Sobo, I think is like the producer of it, like the old Hercules guy that does the Left Behind, some of those recent ones. It also has a Cuban Gooding Jr., who like hasn't really been around because he had all the scandals and stuff. And like, I didn't know he professed to be a Christian, but in the interviews it seems like he did. And I don't know, like I think, I don't know if I will see this movie, but I think Christians would just be aware that there is a new faith-based movie.
It is coming soon.
That about, I think about Christians and they go to jail, and there's some gritty drama or whatever that is. So those are the big ones coming out, but for sure, the Harold on the Purple Crown. Stay tuned for my review coming this week.
Cannot wait. I'll hold my breath until.
But something else you can hold your breath about that hopefully will be more exciting than the Harold on the Purple Crown movie is the last segment of this podcast episode. We have things we like that you should like too. So this is my week to share something that I like, and I thought I would just share one of my favorite consumer locations to frequent and open the wallet and put some more debt on the old credit card, and that is Second and Charles. It's like a chain, but there's not a ton of these. It's like a used bookstore, but it's like a used bookstore with like a jolt of steroids. Like they're massive, tons of just used books, interesting stuff, but also just like other like just stuff to buy. Like they have a bunch of music, like records, a bunch of CDs and that stuff, even like musical instruments. They have a bunch of like retro, like used like toys, like the stuff I used to play with, and then obviously they have like Funkos and different things, and just a lot of like geek kind of unique products, and like a little Harry Potter shelf or Lord of the Rings or Marvel, and they have different kind of weird fun stuff to buy. So there isn't, the closest one to me is like an hour away in Atlanta, or just on the other side of Atlanta, but there are several in this sort of area that like on some of our vacations we sort of add, hey, it only adds an hour and a half to the trip to sort of go this route, so we'll go and hit a couple of these Second and Charles. So if you are somewhere that has a Second and Charles nearby, Google it. I do recommend it. Again, they have a lot of books, but if you don't necessarily want a book, they just have a lot of other fun kind of geeky stuff. Have you ever, I don't know if you've stopped with us on one of these trips.
No, I don't know that I've ever been to a Second and Charles. Is it, I'm assuming, just the southeast?
I think I think it's sort of like where like I know there's some in Florida, some in like South Carolina, and like I think a couple in Georgia.
How would you say it compares to something like Russell Books in Victoria? Because I was just at Russell Books and reminded of how glorious that place is.
Well, it's not. It doesn't always have the like. Because I'm a used bookstore junkie, and
Yeah.
the best used bookstore is like where it's like an old house or something, and it's like
Yeah.
sort of organized, but like not really organized, and there's like stuff on this, like that to me is drop me off, pick me up,
The next
a week and
day.
a half, from now, and I'll find some stuff. It's not necessarily like that. Like it does feel a bit more like modern. I don't always find like as many books there, like of like the real old classic kind of stuff, but it is like for me, it's all about the discovery. Like it's the search. Like you just find, hey, I got this one book, and then just like old toy I used to play with for my kid or something like.
And I think a hack for used bookstores is don't take your children. It's what I've found. Yeah, because if you want to really like dive into the bookstore, like you have to focus.
I know, because some of these like I have two 9-year-olds, like these brats, like. It's like they don't want to spend 4 hours in this bookstore.
I know.
And
Well, I've got a 2 and 5-year-old, and so they can't spend more than like 30 minutes. They love bookstores, but it's like you're either going to a bookstore for them or you're not going, because there's not a chance that you're gonna have. Sometimes my wife and I will just tag team and be like, okay, you have 10 minutes, and I'll watch the kids, and then that's not nearly enough.
Yeah, because a rushed used bookstore experience is not the true
No
bookstore experience.
You might as well not go.
Well, you should still go, but you just won't get the most out of it. It will just be like an appetizer for the real thing.
A pale shadow.
So if you guys have one, go search it out. Hey, if you don't, just always look for, whenever I go to a new city, I always like the first thing I do is just Google like used bookstores near me.
Yeah.
Like I always try and hit whatever city I'm in. I find like their best, rated used bookstores. Hey, books are good, movies are good, but hey, there's nothing beats just having an old, dusty, smelly book in your hand. But hey, one of the other things that is good, and perhaps some people have said dusty and smelly as well, is this podcast. We're excited that you guys have joined us once again, just to get into some interesting stuff. I think there's a lot of value as Christians to just talk through some of these things. So again, encourage you guys, either if you're watching us on YouTube or the audio, send us a message, jump in the comment section, let us know your thoughts on these topics. But we hope you will see you again next week, every Thursday, for more conversations on faith and pop culture.